काम कर रहे हैं? Okay. So, welcome everyone. Thank you very much for coming and participating. We are honored to have an exceptionally eminent set of panelists with us today. So eminent, in fact, that they don't need very much by way of introduction, so I'll keep those short. Dr. Nageswaran is the Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India, the main author of this year's excellent economic survey, and one of the key architects of the budget itself. Dr. Kavita Rao is the director of NIPFP and one of the country's foremost experts in public finance, justly renowned for her work on GST, state finances, and debt sustainability. Dr. Ashok Gulati is perhaps India's preeminent agricultural economist. He is a distinguished professor at ICRIER and recipient of the Padma Shri Award. Dr. Amita Batra is a globally recognized expert in international trade, a professor at JNU, and a former senior fellow at ICRIER. And Mr. Anil Bhardwaj is a distinguished private sector and trade development professional, currently serving as Secretary General of FISME, the Federation of Indian Micro, Small, and Medium Enterprises. So welcome all of you. Thank you so much for making time in your busy schedules. So we are here today at the best of times and the worst of times, to misquote Charles Dickens. The best of times because India, for 3 years in a row, has emerged as the fastest growing major economy in the world amid enviable macroeconomic stability. The worst of times because the rules-based multilateral order that so many of our East Asian and Southeast Asian peers have flourished under seems to be crumbling all around us. It's certainly an exciting time. So the budget that we are here to discuss today was bookended by two dramatic public announcements about eagerly awaited trade deals, which we'll try to get into. On the budget itself, there is much to dissect. So I'm going to ask our panelists to walk us through the implications of the budget for growth, employment, macro stability, external competitiveness, agriculture, the outlook for firms and businesses. But let me start with Anantha. Anantha, in the economic survey, you outline three global scenarios. The first is business as usual. The second is a breakdown of the multipolar order. And the third scenario compounds the breakdown in the multipolar order with a tech correction and a financial crisis. All of these scenarios have a common implication for India in terms of risks to capital flight and a weakening of the rupee. So the argument that you make is that in order to maintain sufficient investor interest, we must simultaneously maximize growth as well as building resilience. So this is captured in your memorable phrase that India must run a marathon as if it were a sprint. So can you start by telling us a bit about what the budget does to prepare us for this challenging metaphorical race?
Thank you. Thank you, Shekhar. Good afternoon, my fellow panelists and ladies and gentlemen. So the budget actually does go a long way in addressing some of these issues that you very succinctly summarized that are there in the preface of the economic survey. One of the important things that the budget does is to obviously put emphasis on manufacturing, particularly in areas where we need to achieve strategic resilience because the world will not necessarily ensure that it will supply us all those items. The most prominent one in the budget is this emphasis on the rare earths corridor. And even on the biopharma and chemicals, it may not necessarily be high tech, but it's not about high tech, it's about essentiality. And those are addressed as well. And the parallel action on the so-called Part B of the budget speech is on customs duty reductions and basic customs duty exemptions in several of these areas. And I'll just point out only one as a specific example. So in the last budget, having announced that we would open up nuclear energy for private sector and foreign investment, it was necessary to provide customs duty exemption for capital equipment related to nuclear energy generation. So in that sense, both that's one example, but there are many in the second part of the speech, budget speech. So in both part A and part B, therefore, take this concept of strategic resilience very seriously. And the other item I would mention is the revival or the promise to revive 200 old in legacy industrial clusters, because whether you look at Shenzhen or Vietnam or even in India, where you have scores of small and medium enterprises, the way you ensure scale is to pool them into clusters, and that is there in the budget in terms of making sure that we are able to achieve this manufacturing. So coming to your point about capital flows in particular, while the risk scenarios that I outlined were common to all countries, but obviously current account deficit countries which depend on global capital will feel the impact more than others. And I think with the two trade agreements, as you said, which both bookend the budget and the economic survey in some sense, I think we have reduced the idiosyncratic risk that India faces with respect to capital flows. And in the last 1 year, what happened, particularly since the penal tariff was announced, clearly both direct uh, investment flows were not affected as much as ODI from India picked up quite a bit in 25-26. If you look at the RBI's granular data, the gross FDI flows in 25-26 have been better than 24-25. But the net numbers are only slightly better because India's outbound direct investment, ODI, has picked up much more than 24-25, and that's partly because the penal tariff actually gave rise to the concerns in Indian businesses' mind that instead of China plus one, do we have to look at India plus one? With 50% tariff, then locating production in India was no longer viable. So the budget doesn't directly address this, but these two developments kind of address the capital flow issue. Lastly, I would say it's very important to be able to indigenize manufacturing, and the economic survey and the budget isn't apologetic about the need for indigenization in the kind of the world that we operate in, but it should be done with input costs being lower, and that is where the customs duty reductions play a very big part on primary and intermediate products, spares and components, etc. But there is much more. There is much more to be done. But more importantly, if and when we have to indigenize, because the world A may not necessarily supply all that we need and in assured quantities and timelines, etc. And maybe it will obviously not lead to employment generation locally. It's equally important that protection be done in return for industry to deliver on productivity, export competitiveness within a reasonable time frame. Although that is not particularly explicitly mentioned in the budget, that is the other important contractual compact with the private sector that will make the budget and the economic survey complete in one sense. Back to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Anantha. I should have said before starting that we're going to do this in two rounds. So I'm going to ask everyone a first round of questions. Please speak for 5-7 minutes or however long you feel comfortable. Then we'll do a second round of questions from the panel, and then we'll turn over to the audience for an interactive Q&A. So let me turn next to Kavita. So, Kavita, it's very heartening to see that fiscal consolidation is continuing. It's on a glide path, as it were, with the fiscal deficit down to 4.4% from 6.4% in fiscal year 2023. For the next year, there is only a marginal fiscal consolidation plan to 4.3%, but this is occurring against the backdrop of a big ramp up in capital expenditure. So the fact that we're able to fiscally consolidate despite that ramp up, I think is good news. Can you say something about the ambition and realism of our future fiscal trajectory and the associated debt dynamics? And by way of context, Sajid Chinoy of JP Morgan has done some interesting R minus G calculations emphasizing the role of nominal GDP growth. So according to his calculations, if you have a 10% nominal growth for the next 5 years, then you can hit the target of reaching 5% debt to GDP ratio by 50%, sorry, by reducing the fiscal deficit to 3.6%. But if the growth is just 1 percentage point lower at 9%, then the fiscal consolidation has to go all the way to 3%. So growth is obviously a very important part of the story. Secondly, I would welcome your views on the composition of the current fiscal consolidation, which has come not so much from increased tax revenues, indirect taxes are actually down quite sharply, but from large RBI dividends. So, on the one hand, this is good news in the sense that the fiscal consolidation does not have the kind of contractionary impulse that you might have otherwise expected. But on the other hand, does that not leave the project of fiscal consolidation vulnerable when RBI and PSU dividends start dwindling?
Thank you. Thank you, Shekhar, for inviting me. I'll start briefly by reminding all of us that we are expecting a GDP revision at the end of this month. So a lot of what we talk about might be irrelevant once those numbers come. By a way of a quick back of the envelope reference, if the nominal GDP happens to be higher by about 10%, we perhaps would not be looking at any need for further fiscal consolidation. We might hit a 50% without doing anything. So that is one element that we should perhaps keep in mind when we are talking about debt to GDP. That having been said, the context of the budget allows the finance minister to take a moderate pause in how she's choosing to work on the reduction in the debt to GDP ratio over from beginning now to 2030. So she's chosen to do a 0.5 percentage point reduction in debt to GDP ratio, which translates in turn into a 0.1% reduction in fiscal deficit. So in principle, if the world were doing well and if Indian growth was doing well, we wouldn't worry too much. But if we are expecting the government to support the economy in the interim, it's being conservative would perhaps work in our favor. So then the second part of the question is, while we are pegging debt to GDP or deficit to GDP, what happens to receipts and expenditures? And that is where I think I'm a little uncomfortable with the numbers that the budget has put out, because we're looking at receipts, tax revenues, net tax revenues growing by about 7%. No, lower. We have yes, net tax revenue by 7%. Revenue receipts growing by 5.7%. So the fiscal space we are talking about is not that large. Then that, along with the fact that interest payments to revenue receipts has actually increased this year from 38% to 39.7%. There is some preemption of available resources, additional preemption of available resources by interest payments. Net result would be revenue expenditures will have only so much space to grow. So that is a concern, especially given the large number of program announcements that the budget does contain on a variety of sectors. Most sectors have been flagged in the budget speech with some support, which is presented as support which goes over 5 years in many cases. So the way I'm looking at it is nominal GDP growth is the easiest way to do both fiscal consolidation and do find resources to stimulate various sectors of the economy. The only place where I'd vary a little bit from the budget is my anticipation is that GST revenues wouldn't be as slow or wouldn't report such a low growth, which means we might actually have a some overshooting there.
Compensation says that's the reason. The compensation says won't be there.
But I never looked at compensation cess whenever I'm looking at numbers because that would step out.
No, but I'm happy. I'm happy about it.
Yeah. So I'm only looking at CGST. I never look at compensation cess because it never accrued as revenue to Government of India. So to that extent, my anticipation is that the receipts performance would be a little better. But the biggest correction, I think, is going to come from how GDP revision takes place. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kavita. Let's turn to agriculture. So, Ashok, you have called this a business as usual budget for the agricultural sector, with subsidies dominating development expenditures. I've been particularly struck by your research comparing the returns on the fertilizer subsidy to the returns on agricultural R&D, which says that for every 1 rupee that you spend on the fertilizer subsidy, there is a return of 88 paise, whereas for every 1 rupee spent on agricultural R&D, the return is 11 rupees. For every million rupees spent on the fertilizer subsidy, an estimated 26 people are lifted out of poverty. For every million rupees spent on agricultural R&D, 328 people are lifted out of poverty. These are differences of an order of magnitude, a factor greater than 10. So please take us through your reading of the budget, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
The way I look at the budget in combination with economic survey, Anantha talks economics, and economic survey gives you an upbeat that some changes will come. And when you read the budget, at least in agriculture and food space, you feel depressed. It's business as usual. I'll give you the example. Agriculture Ministry, which is supposed to take care of agriculture, the budget is 1.4 lakh crores. Last year it was 1.37 lakh crores, so there is hardly any change, 2%. The agriculture growth, which was in FY25 4.6, has collapsed to 3.1 in FY25-26. So we were expecting some booster dose. But then looking at agriculture ministry at 1.4 lakh crores actually is turning a blind eye from the big monster sitting somewhere else, and that is the fertilizer subsidy. Fertilizer subsidy budget is 1.7 lakh crores, which is bigger than the Ministry of Agriculture's budget, and they have nothing to do with the farmers as such. And they are, with a few industries, particularly urea industry, 35 plants, and nobody knows what is their real cost and how in cost plus pricing you are getting all this. So we worked it out that if you are spending the money, because economics tells me scarce resources, the way it should be allocated is where the marginal returns are the highest in terms of agri GDP or in terms of poverty reduction. These are the two fundamental objectives, and the numbers you have already given. But when you look at what is happening, the way it is being allocated, I feel politics is 10 times more than economics. So it's 1:10 ratio, because not just the fertilizer subsidy, you look at the food subsidy. Food subsidy is 2.28 lakh crores. And when you say we have reduced poverty in this country massively, and extreme poverty as per World Bank's definition is only 5.3%, then why are you subsidizing and giving free food to 56% of population today, 813 million or 811 million? So economics tells you, oh, this is all only 10%, 15% economics in this, and rest is all politics. And this food subsidy bill was introduced, the act was introduced when Montek was there in the government. So we need to ask, do we have any relation with poverty? And this free thing, 2.28 lakh crores that, and the fertilizer subsidy 1.7 lakh crore, and it is under budgeted. The final number will come near 2 lakh crores because last year's revised figure is 1.86 lakh crores. So it is going to be, the two together are 4 lakh crores. In a budget of 53.5 lakh crores, you have 4 lakh crores of these subsidies, and when you talk to the farmers, they say fertilizer subsidy is not to us, it is to the consumer. I said, how? They say basically fertilizer is being consumed by three crops: rice, wheat, and sugarcane. That's where 75% of fertilizers roughly go. And all three are under MSP regime. So by giving this subsidy, you keep the costs low, and therefore minimum support price is low, and therefore it is actually a pass on to the consumers. So you have a system which has an inherent consumer bias in the system, and therefore agriculture is given a second hand treatment, I would say, because the growth impetus that has to come by building value chains of high value agriculture where the incomes can be raised is missing. Very little investment. One Makhana board here or 100 crores. What 100 crores will it lift Indian agriculture? So those types of things, I think it's a doles. I would say 80% doles and 20% developmental expenditure. If we can turn it around, 80% development and 20% doles, then this country's agriculture will be flying like anything. But politics is a hard choice.
I mean, just to be provocative, is there not a role for the private sector as well in agricultural R&D, given the kinds of numbers you're getting on returns?
Well, I can give you one global number. What India's agri R&D expenditure out of 1.4 lakh crores is only less than 10,000 crores. That's $1.1 billion. One company, Bayer, in 2024 spent 2.6 billion euros. 2.6 billion euros. So the access to new technology and the frontiers of technology are with these global companies. So either we buy some technology from them, we will have to pay some trade fees. If we are not ready to pay that and we are not investing at home, I mean the controversy today, Indo-US trade deal on GM question, US GM corn productivity is 11 tons per hectare. Ours is at 3.5 tons. Our soybean is 1.2 versus 3.5 tons in US. It's 3 times. So unless you invest, either the government has to invest or the big private sector companies have to invest. But when the private sector invests, they want to take the returns from those investments. And that is where the question of trade fee comes in. And we messed up on the cotton question. I think that's another round we need to have on the BT cotton question.
We'll save that for the second round. But okay, so a lot of people have already talked a little bit about the free trade deal. So, Amita, let me turn to you. So, we've got a lot of detail on the EU FTA, a little bit less detail on the US FTA. But what I would like to ask you is, what does the budget do to strengthen our trade position and take advantage of the opportunities that are offered by these FTAs? More generally, I'd like to ask you, how does the budget position India in this brave new world when the decades-old multilateral trading system seems to be fragmenting and being replaced by something that is more transactional, if not coercive? Just as a point of reference, in Davos last month, Mark Carney made this viral speech about the need for the middle powers of the world to band together. Now, India is certainly not a middle power in terms of GDP, but in terms of trade, where we've traditionally been quite a closed economy, I would say that calling us a middle power is quite an accurate characterization. So what does this budget hold, to chart the course of middle powers like India?
Thank you. Thank you, Shekhar. Commenting on the budget, I think I'd like to start by saying that this budget had a context, both in terms of what the world was presenting to us in terms of greater trade uncertainty, and second, in terms of the FTAs that we are signing and everybody else is getting into. So there was really a context for us to build on and to build towards. Uh, Recognition of the fact that the world is uncertain and exports are important, I think it was very encouraging to find the finance minister in her opening statement saying that global trade is uncertain and India needs to expand its exports even in this uncertain world, and increase its manufacturing competitiveness as well as increase its global integration, global economic integration. This, I think, is a first ever by a finance minister in a budget statement. Very encouraging, very positive. The very may have been sometime towards the 1990s. This may have been said earlier, but I think in recent times I've come across this kind of a statement for the first time. Recognition of exports as part of India's growth trajectory and emphasis on that. The positive in terms of a lot of things that are, that are being brought in terms of schemes as far as trade facilitation is concerned. Customs procedures to a certain extent, warehousing, digitization, seamless movement of goods. I think these are all very, very positive as far as movement of goods is concerned and pushing for our exports is concerned. But what is it that I would have really liked to see, or what is it that I would want the direction of our trade policy, even in terms of what the budget could have done? What is it that I would have liked to see? The first I would like to say is on tariffs. The Dr. Nageswaran has just made a statement in terms of certain reduction in tariffs. Yes, a few steps forward have been taken forward in this budget too, as far as tariff reduction is concerned. Duty-free, duty exemption in certain nuclear, critical minerals, and some of the strategic sectors. I see less as far as the labor-intensive sectors are concerned. But more importantly, what I want to point out, is how do we fare after these reductions, as far as tariffs are concerned, relative to our competing nations? Because when we talk about FTAs, I think it's important to keep in mind that there are certain other countries that have a first mover advantage in these countries that we are signing FTAs with, be that UK, be that the European Union. I take Vietnam as an example because they've already signed their FTAs. The FTAs are going to be in terms of zero duty, culminating or completing their tariff reduction schedule by 27 and 28, EU and UK respectively. When I compare, we started the tariff reduction exercise in the last two budgets. In the last budget, there was an indication that there would be a more comprehensive review of the tariffs. I wish that was done in this budget. I have read certain statements, but by both the CBIC chairman as well as the finance minister in some of her interviews, saying that this will be taken forward during the year. What do I want them to do as far as taking this forward during the year is concerned, to take full advantage of the FTAs that we are signing, is a reduction that compares favorably with our competing nations. We've reduced tariffs, as I said, over the last two budgets. We brought it down. I think the average MFN that comes down from 17 something to about 16, 13 point something in the manufacturing sector in comparison with an 8 point something for Vietnam. I'm not even bothered about this overall average MFN applied. What really concerns me and what I would like to see in this year, and I've emphasized this year because, this budget was so important in terms of FTAs, because we are looking at a year that is going to see the implementation of the FTA with the UK. We are also hoping in the next coming financial year, the ratification and implementation. This is what our minister, the Commerce Minister, has stated as far as the EU FTA is concerned. So we really need to be up in terms of comparing well with our comparator developing economies, Vietnam, as I said. Now, coming back to tariffs, what is it that I'd like to see is a reduction or an increase in the number of tariff lines that are in the 0 to 5 category. About 40% of tariff lines for Vietnam fall in the 0 to 5 category, in comparison to ours, which is about 2.8, if I'm not mistaken. I have the statistics, sorry. Yeah, 2.8. 39.4 as far as Vietnam is concerned, last available statistics. Comparison to ours is 2.8. This is overall. Also, as far as the 5 to 10 category is concerned, we've increased in that. But then again, our major concentration is in the 10 to 15 category as far as number of tariff lines are concerned. I think it is this distribution that one needs to see or one wants to see more favorable for us relative to our competing nations. Not everything is produced in India. Not everything can be produced in India. Critical inputs for labor-intensive sectors, be that textiles and clothing, be that leather, footwear, etc., all of these certain inputs need to be imported, machinery. So, I mean, that is where we need to focus. And that is the kind of trajectory that one would want to see happening if it hasn't happened in the budget during the year. That's the first part of the budget that I would like to kind of put forward. The second part is with respect to the BIT, the announcement that was made in the last budget in terms of a review of the bilateral investment treaty, model treaty of 2016. Again, why do I emphasize that? We are looking at FTAs where we have not commitment, but we do have indications as far as our trading partners are concerned of investing so much in India. There are certain numbers, targets that have been given by these countries to invest in India. If we want these investments to come in, I think we need to have a mechanism, we need to have an investment treaty that, to a certain extent, provides the kind of flexibilities that other countries have already accomplished. Why this hasn't been done, why this was not mentioned, I don't know. There's nothing that I have come across, but I wish this was done, and I think this needs to be done. Particularly because you also have the EU emphasizing the need for and desire for signing an investment protection agreement with India. We really need to be up with having our own investor protection mechanism. If you want to go along with the EU court system, which some of the other countries like Vietnam has done, maybe we should start discussing that. There seems to be little as far as discussion on these issues is concerned. A certain element of promotion and facilitation could have gone into the EU FTA, but maybe that comes in later. A third is very important, and if I have another minute, yeah. A third thing that I would have wanted to see in the budget, is a preparation towards CBAM, EUDR, environmental standards, regulations that we are going to be up for as the EU FTA gets implemented. Give it a year as far as the implementation process is concerned. May take longer. But preparation is going to take still longer, So provision or an outlay for CBAM, how is it that we are going to prepare our micro, small, medium enterprises? I mean, as far as textiles and clothing is concerned, clothing, by the way, we've been losing our share as far as the European Union is concerned. How are we going to prepare the micro and small industries which have no or relatively negligible wherewithal to abide by the process as far as certification process as far as EU is concerned? Regulatory process requires traceability across the value chain. We have the most fragmented value chain as far as textiles and clothing are concerned, I think helping assistance outlay in this budget towards this objective would have been so useful to indicate that something will be done. I understand that there are these mega textile parks that have been announced, but I think these have been in the making for some time. We've had them in the past, not necessarily have they proved to be successful. What is it that's going to be different as far as these textile parks are concerned this time? Do we have the possibility of creating the right infrastructure as far as traceability, as well as along the value chain, the requirements in terms of effluents, chemicals, carbon emission for all these, are we going to set up those in these textile parks? If so, what is the outlay? My last point on taking from the EU FTA is that the EU FTA has announced a joint fund for CBAM, towards which I think they have initial commitment of about 500 million euro. We haven't announced any on our part. Is there any plan to do that? The budget could have indicated something in terms of what is going to be the kind of outlay that we have, what is the provision that we are making towards this joint fund, which is ultimately going to be helping both in terms of technology transfer, as well as in terms of preparing us for, the verification and traceability across the value chain, be that in manufacturing or any other sector, So I think these are the things that I would have wanted to see or would like to see happening during the year as far as preparing to take full advantage of the FTAs that we have signed. FTAs will provide us with market access. Those markets have competition for us. There are other developing countries that are moving as rapidly or are already there. So we really need to have preparation, very serious preparation towards this. And the budget had this context. Something has been done, but I think more could have been done in each of these. Plurilaterals, the WTO, maybe should I come back later?
Okay, thanks a lot, Amita. In fact, you're providing a very nice segue to MSMEs, which is what I wanted to ask Anil about. So, the budget makes several commitments towards the development of MSMEs in India, aimed at facilitating growth and finance. Let me just mention a couple of them. One is this SME Growth Fund, which is supposed to provide equity or semi-equity support. And the other is the Trade Receivables Discounting Platform, TREDS, which is going to be linked to government procurement and is in fact going to be made compulsory for government procurement and PSU procurement. So what is your view on these measures? Are they enough? Should more have been done? Is there anything else about MSMEs that you'd like to talk about in the budget?
Thank you for giving the opportunity to Fismay and me. Picking TREDS first, TREDS is a very important platform, not only just for the supplies that are made by MSMEs to government, but as well as to the private sector. So it serves for discounting of invoices both to the public as well as private. So we did conduct a study which was incidentally released by CE Nageswaran ji with the game that approximately 8.27 lakh crore worth of let's say delayed payments were there in 2023, and they came down to 7.34 crore in 2024. So reduction of approximately a lakh of crore. And that was primarily because of the initiatives like TREDS. TREDS had been picking up pace, especially in the last 3 years. And currently, the total cumulative value of discounting would be around 2 lakh crore. There are more than 1,35,000 MSMEs that are registered there, and over 8,000 corporates, including the PSUs and CPSCs. Now, coming to this specific announcement, it is important in the context that, first of all, there is already a 25% set aside for purchases that are to be made from micro and small enterprises by the central government agencies and CPSCs. And the incidences of delayed payments are primarily with them only, largely with them. So I think this addresses a very specific question, and what it does is that earlier also they were registered, but they were not transacting. So what it does is now not only the TREDS has become kind of a clearing house, so to say, for the invoices. So all the invoices will have to be put there, and if you are not paying in time, or if you don't have provisions, then at least the banks can discount them. Now, there had been other structural problems there. Many banks were not very willing to discount the bills of CPSCs which are not really in the pink health, or not having AAA rating. Secondly, similarly, there are many MSMEs whose balance sheets were not found very good by the banks. So there was some kind of hesitation. Even if the platform was there, they were not really discounting. So what this time it has been done is that CGT MSE, which is credit guarantee, has been linked with this. So that extra comfort is provided to the banks, and banks would be more willing to fund. So I think the amount of delayed payments, I think, would come down substantially. By next year, we have this game and FISMA study. And this is a very important intervention. Now, coming to the 10,000 crore rupees SME growth fund, I see a slight point of departure here, that it is for the first time that we are shifting our gauge from micro and small enterprises to medium-sized enterprises. And we are realizing that our industry, if we are opening up opportunities like through India-EU FTA or India-UK FTA, or other FTAs that we have recently signed, these are potential areas. But whether, as Amita ji has rightly said, whether we have that capacity to really take advantage of these opportunities that are coming. Do we have the scale? Do we have the quality? Do we have the technology? Do we have the logistics, can say, sorted out? Or also, very, very importantly, whether we are doing enough in enabling manufacturing in India, whether we have issues of import duty structure in place, right? In import duty structure, for example, whether it is iron and steel or copper or aluminum or plastic raw material, we have very high rate of duties, and thanks to issues like anti-dumping duties and the QCOs and so on, the cost becomes even higher. So MSMEs find it difficult to compete globally. So we have to come, even if the opportunities are being opened, whether we would be able to take advantage in competing with Vietnam or Indonesia or Thailand, I think is only time will tell, and we need to work more there. But nevertheless, it's a very good initiative. It is specifically addressing the issues of MSMEs' access to external equity so that they can scale up. Currently, there is no mechanism whatsoever available to MSMEs, so I think this is a very important step to address this. There are a couple of other things like top-up for self-reliant fund, which is an old fund, and they have just provided another top-up. So far, under this fund, approximately 11,000 crore rupees have been given to 577 MSMEs. And there is another interesting initiative which is mentioned about the 200 clusters, legacy clusters. Though specifically in the budget speech, it is not mentioned that where from the money will come. But if you look at the DPIIT allocations, you would see that there are approximately 3,000 crore rupees parked for plug and play infrastructure. I think that's what they are going to link it up. This is also very much needed, because one of the major issues that MSMEs find it to have access to affordable industrial infrastructure. So I think it is very different. There is one very, very important point of departure I find in this budget. I'll come to that later because that would require another 5-7 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anil. Anantha, I know that you've got a hard stop at 2 o'clock. So maybe I could invite you to respond to some of the comments that various people have made. And if you have no responses, then perhaps I could ask you about the labor implications of the budget. And in particular, what I was interested in hearing your views on was services versus manufacturing, because everyone agrees that manufacturing is labor intensive, services are not. On the other hand, if you look at comparative advantage patterns, it looks like our comparative advantage might be in services. How do you square that circle, and what does the budget have to say about these things?
I think Dr. Kavita Rao started by talking about the fact that the GDP revisions may make many of these discussions somewhat pointless, or not further efforts required in terms of achieving the fiscal debt and deficit ratios. But if you remember the last time when we had 2011-12 base year revision, I think the GDP was marked down by about 2.5%, rather than marked up by some order of magnitude, which would have been useful, but that was not done at the time. But this time as well, if we have been doing a good job as we are, that in terms of coverage of both the informal sector and unlisted companies, etc., in our annual estimates as we are, I don't think I mean, this is just my personal guess at this point. I don't know whether it will be a case of, statistically insignificant in terms of so I think that for the fiscal effort will still be necessary. So I concede that. I mean, I think Dr. Rao made a good point about the GST numbers could be better, but what I heard from the budget division was that it was mainly reflecting the fact that the compensation cess was not going to be there. But otherwise, even then, the direct taxes, the buoyancy assumed is 1.1, which is in line with the long-term average, but not in the recent years where the buoyancy was higher. So there is some element of cushion there. In fact, some people say by underestimating the tax revenues, you have bumped up the market borrowing number. And together with states, you are actually now putting pressure on the sovereign bond yield. That's something sometimes conservatism can have its downside as well. As for Dr. Gulati's points about agriculture, all I can say is that they were useful and important points, but I have no more inputs to add. In the chapter on agriculture, we have dealt with the fertilizer dimension, and we also obliquely talked about the need for crop diversification, etc., away from rice and wheat, etc. But this is one area where I would have been happier to see a more synergistic connection between the economic survey and the budget. So I'll leave it there. As far as the Dr. Amita Batra's comments about the that we have far less percentage of items in the 0 to 5% category, whether it is raw materials, intermediates, or capital goods. I think that's well known. And I do agree that more needs to be done and relatively quickly. And we don't have the luxury of time given the state of the world and how rapidly it is evolving in many areas. So I think one cannot quarrel with that. On investment facilitation, I'm not personally sure as to where, but each agreement these days is looking for investment facilitation as well. So we have something lined up with the UK, and I'm sure something will materialize with the European Union as well, even if the bilateral investment treaty framework isn't yet fully addressed. As far as the preparation for CBAM, and she pointed out that in the agreement itself, there is a provision for European Union to pitch in. But I just wanted to leave one small information here. It happened after the budget, after the European Union, India, FTA, and the US trade deal. This is dated February 5th, a Bloomberg story. The European Union is set to relax emission reduction rules for thousands of companies, recalibrating the world's most rigorous carbon market under pressure from industry and governments concerned about the region's sinking competitiveness, full stop. And there is a long Bloomberg article. So I suppose hopefully by the time we get to implement this is a mood discussion. Okay. So, and moving on to what my good friend, Mr. Anil Bhardwaj said, and I think what he said about the trades is actually a pointer to what Dr. Gulati said about the lack of follow-through in the budget on agriculture, because the kind of attention that MSME ministry has paid to the trades development actually shows up in the budget speech. So because these proposals come from the administrative ministry, they do the homework, etc. And I'm also glad to hear from him saying that the MSME Champion Fund was a needed development. Now, on the labor market front that you pointed out, I thought while the labor codes were notified outside of the budget and well before the budget last year, as far as the labor market is concerned, apart from women's hostels and other skilling dimensions mentioned, I thought the particularly striking thing in the budget was 4 areas, which also speaks to the need to develop skills in the areas which will not be so affected by AI. The care economy ecosystem, allied health professionals, tourism, and emphasis on orange economy. I think these are actually important down payments on the labor side, in my opinion, because we need to think about areas where we should attract our youngsters to prepare themselves in, which are more likely to be independent of AI diffusion in other areas. I think that is the most important contribution I can recall, because the last 2 budgets did quite a lot on employment-linked incentive schemes, apprenticeship, and also incentivizing both employers and employees for the first-time jobs by sharing their EPFO contributions, etc. But where we need to do more is actually in apprenticeship, because bulk of the learning happens while people are on the job, not before they get in. So that is where I think the implementation and our apprenticeship penetration percentage is very, very low compared to countries which have been successful in manufacturing like Germany, Switzerland, Japan, etc. And that is one area where I think it is not so much about budget, it's about execution. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, Anantha. I should point out that ICRIER has a flourishing internship program. So we're with you on that. Thank you so much for joining us, and please do feel free to leave whenever you need to.
And hand it on for the 10 minutes.
Okay. So let's go on. Kavita, I wanted to come back to you with a question about center versus states. So, is growing debt, and it's supposed to be monotonically growing as far as I can see at the state level, going to unwind whatever progress we're making with fiscal consolidation at the center? That's one thing. And then I also wanted to talk about something which has been kind of lost because of all the blaze of publicity around the FTAs and the budget, and that's the 16th Finance Commission. And in particular, there used to be a 2.5% weight given to tax collection efforts, which has been taken away and replaced by a weight on GDP contribution. Do you fear that this might disincentivize tax collection at the state level at precisely the time that it's needed?
Okay. I guess it's easier to start with the second one, right? So the Finance Commission reports and the recommendations are very interesting in that they introduce a lot of elements as ways of incentivizing certain behavior by states, but they're all based on historical performance. So they look at the performance in the last 5 years and they give you an incentive for the next 5 years. What you do in the next 5 years may affect what happens in terms of the formula going forward, but it doesn't impact your devolution in the current period. So that is one thing to keep in mind. So if a parallel question that often would be asked is there's an incentive for forests. Do states spend more efforts to improve their forest cover because there is an incentive for forests? Not necessarily. The incentive you get is what is based on historical numbers, and it doesn't adjust fast enough for you for it to affect your behavior. So that's one element. The second part of the story is that states are in tight fiscal situation. For a variety of reasons, the GST for one period was also contributing to this stress because the revenues under GST were not keeping pace with what states believed they would earn prior to GST. So that is, and the states don't have flexibility to change rates or to fiddle with GST. So the autonomy element of tax policy for states is moderately lower in the new regime. The reduction of tax rates under GST 2.0 would have or contributed some more to the stress because, again, revenue performance last year was affected. And my expectation is that growth will return to its historical, so you would come back to a normal buoyancy of 1, but that still leaves you at a lower level compared to where you would have been. So that those are drivers which have a larger dimensionality in terms of what determines states' behavior. For every state to be able to spend on whatever they would like to budget, it is important for them to raise resources. So the 2.5% incentive is not large enough to change behaviors dramatically. The second part is they have introduced a weight for the size of the state's contribution to national GDP. And both these variables tend to move in the same direction. So perhaps you will get the same kinds of effects. And therefore, I wouldn't think that states are disincentivized to collect revenues. Um, Going to the debt to GDP ratio, the states haven't been able to do as much as the center has. Center has done a fair amount of fiscal consolidation over the long period, but even post COVID, COVID was a shock to the system, but we have been able to do a considerable amount of fiscal consolidation. The states haven't uniformly been able to do that. The last year, the last budget deficit to GDP for the states on an average was crossing 3%. Before that, we were sort of below 3% on average. So there is a pressure from the states in terms of escalation in debt to GDP. But the union government and its vigilance on states borrowing has also improved. Off-budget borrowings are being reined in to the extent that people can figure out where they are happening. And therefore, I would expect that the states have less space to spread out, even though they might like to spread out. So the composition of expenditure might be what one is more concerned about, and maybe not the debt to GDP per se.
Thanks. Amrita, let me get back to you. So you had sort of curbed your remarks last time. You were about to talk about the WTO and multilateralism. I assume that whatever FTA we sign with the EU will take care to be WTO compliant, even if the WTO's adjudication mechanism is currently in disrepair. I'm less certain that the FTA with the US will respect any kind of WTO framework. What are your views on multilateralism going forward?
Well, I think multilateralism should be retermed as plurilateralism, because I think where is multilateralism? We are seeing very little of it in terms of the blatant manner in which one economy is going ahead and fixing tariffs vis-a-vis individual economies, differential tariffs, which are not MFN tariffs, not following that. The trade agreements, so-called trade agreements that are being done are not WTO compliant trade agreements as far as that economy is concerned, but all economies have rushed to somehow or the other have a deal with the United States, So these are not all WTO compliant. We have one set or one section proportion of global trade that is happening according to that. But what I would want to say here is two things. That there is also on the other side, an attempt as far as the European Union is concerned. I see that as one taking forward the idea of rules-based trade. I'll refrain from calling it multilateralism, plurilateralism, anything, but I think rules-based trade, which can be applicable on an MFN basis to the largest possible proportion of global trade, that is where EU has moved forward by having its dialogue partnership formalized with the CPTPP. CPTPP is the other large high standard trade agreement that we see, or a trade platform that we see as far as global trade being conducted on rules-based trade is concerned. So we now have a CPTPP and ASEAN and EU that are together in a formulation that I think can become the future platform for rules-based trade. And as far as India is concerned, I would therefore like to see India at least announce its intent to participate and start its preparation. Except that, Dr. Nageswaran is leaving, but if we base everything on this may not happen, and so we don't need to prepare, I'm not so sure whether we would want to go by those high standards that the CPTPP demands, But I think we need to prepare for that. Even for CBAM, I would say that if you don't have it, even if you don't have it in the rigorous manner that EU is now stating it will have to, or it will take a review of, we cannot deny the fact that there is an emission trading system as far as EU is concerned. It has been there for a long time, and it will be extended in some of the other form to all its trading partners. One. Two, All other countries are coming up with their own version of the carbon border tax. So there may not be a CBAM as far as EU is concerned, but a carbon border tax, be that Australia, be that United Kingdom, UK in fact has specified its date of implementation as 2027. So there are other countries that are very much in the process of developing these systems. We cannot sit by and say there will be a review that will be more relaxed and maybe we'll be prepared for it then. It's important to prepare for these aspects, Apart from CPTPP, I think where India needs to change its stance is the WTO in terms of accepting that it is going to be a process of variable geometry that is going to prevail from now on. We have to accept the fact that US is doing what it's doing. Countries have accepted it. We cannot anymore be talking about I don't know if I can say this, but I will say this, of MFN really being applicable in the world. It's not, accept this. Plurilaterals, here I would like to say, it makes me very happy when India accepts CBAM as it is. I was not aware of this argument, but as it is in the India-EU FTA. We've got no carve-outs in that, except that there'll be a joint fund and there'll be some assistance in terms of making our accepting or kind of equivalent, drawing equivalence as far as pricing there and our reduction of emission is concerned. We have, for the first time, therefore, negotiated what we have so far called a non-trade issue in a trade agreement. Does this imply that we get off that particular plank of our argument that these are all non-trade issues and start to get down to negotiating these within the multilateral system? I think that's the transition that I'm interested in. I would like to see, are we ready to negotiate plurilateral agreements on issues that we have so far considered to be non-trade? We are talking about labor issues, for example. We've accepted labor standards in our UK FTA, for example. So I see that shift. It's a shift that's happened in terms of trade agreements, but I feel positive in the sense of us having given up that stance, even if it's in a limited manner in the trade agreements. We need to carry that forward. I think that's a very important bit. Two, I also see from the limited information that's available as far as the India-US joint statement is concerned, that we are up for negotiating digital trade rules, We have objected to the e-commerce plurilateral so far. There is also the fact that US, by the way, has withdrawn from its earlier stance, I don't know how far US has gone along with our stance. I don't think it's the same. It's not pushing anymore for the e-commerce plurilateral nonetheless, But I see whichever way it's occurring, we are looking at India undertaking some kind of a shifting position, in its FTAs. And I hope that it's translated even at the multilateral forum. And we need to kind of get down to actually translating that to the multilateral forum. I have yet to see a reform paper coming from our side. US has submitted its proposition. EU has submitted its paper to the WTO. I think we need to do a similar exercise. It's very close to the next ministerial at the WTO. No time to lose. We need to get down to doing it.
Thank you, Amita. I couldn't agree with you more. I think India should be at the forefront of negotiating whatever the parameters of the next global trading system are. And I think you also make an important point, which has almost gone unnoticed, that in implicitly accepting CBAM as part of this, that's quite a sea change in terms of sort of accepting deeper standards which traditionally have been kept out of trade negotiations. Ashok, let me turn back to you. So we've talked about subsidies. You've been talking about subsidies for a long time. Some of your other recent projects have involved programs to increase farmers' incomes in various ways. This is absolutely critical if we are to get the kind of rural-urban migration that we must strive for. In terms of photovoltaics, in terms of shifting to cash crops, various other ideas that you've discussed. What does the budget say about these, if anything?
Well, let me put three problems of Indian agriculture on the table. We have achieved food security. There is abundance of grains, at least, in terms of availability, in terms of economic access when you are giving free. But nutritional security agenda is still on the table. 35% of our children below the age of 5 are stunted. Not much attention is being given. In a normal process, when the incomes increase, then you switch from cereal-based diets to more diversified diets. That's how nutrition improves. But the income in the rural areas where the masses are, agriculture households' income average is 20,000 rupees per month. 20,000 rupees per month. Now, you have to augment this even when you want manufacturing revolution. If you talk to why private investment is not coming in manufacturing, they say there is no demand. The demand from you and me are done, but the demand from the bottom is not coming. So unless we augment their income, your manufacturing revolution is at stake. The income in the rural areas, agriculture will not go up by just producing wheat and rice, because you are throwing this in the market at free and even putting in ethanol plants. So those prices will remain suppressed. So you have to move towards high value agriculture or think out of the box. We came up with this agri photovoltaic. On the same land, you can keep on doing 2 crops and create a photovoltaic at 10 feet, 12 feet, and energy you can provide. And that we are setting up 2 pilots in 3 states. We are setting up pilots. Their income can be doubled within 6 months. But then it requires huge capital. The bank has to give loans. It doesn't exist whether it is a priority sector lending or not, how those incomes from energy will be treated, whether it will be under income tax or not. All those things have to be sorted out. So we are working on that. Third thing that I should put on the table, on which much emphasis has not been given. In certain pockets of our agriculture, we are under tremendous pressure in terms of damaging our soils, our groundwater, the greenhouse gas emissions and biodiversity loss. So my team under Dr. Reena has been working on these, especially in Punjab Haryana belt. It's an ecological disaster taking place right in front of our nose. But there is no package. We talk about self-sufficiency in pulses and oilseeds, but we don't have proper policy when your entire incentive structure is skewed in favor of wheat, rice, sugarcane, which are water intensive and fertilizer intensive because of the subsidies you are giving. So I think we have to think in terms of creating crop neutral incentive structures in the economy. We have to think that we have neglected the planet's concern, and we have to get back onto that, and we have to increase the profits of the peasants, which will be through high value agriculture, which requires a different type of value chain. The way we did for milk, we need to do it for fruits and vegetables. Unless we do that, business as usual, I'm sorry, it's not going to lead anywhere. I'll go back to that he raises our expectations, and when next day after that nothing happens. So that's where the big disconnect is between the economic survey and the budget. Thank you.
Thanks. Anil, we'll turn to you finally before we throw the floor open for Q&A. You said you had some further remarks,
Yes.
so please go for it.
So I just wanted to sort of attract your attention to one major announcement that has come in economic survey as well as in the budget. But actually in 2024, we conducted a study in merit, study for identifying strategies for quadrupling merit GDP. It was in response to answer a question that, when we are talking about $5 trillion economy and $1 trillion economy, for example, in state in UP, what the district's role is there in the scheme of things. Because ultimately it was major economic unit of the state. And there one interesting fact was that half of the factors that were restraining the growth of the district were in the domain of urban local bodies. So it was the functioning or the non-functioning of the local bodies, their governance structure, their lack of finance, their lack of ability to plan things, provide for transport and other things. This was restraining the growth in micro, small, and medium enterprises. And we fed this study to all the agencies that were involved. So to me, I think it is very interesting to note that in economic survey, we have a full chapter now dedicated to this. I think we should study this. Equally interesting is the announcement in the budget when it talks about allocation of 5,000 crore per CER, which is the City Economic Regions study, over 5 years proposed for implementing their plans in Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities. At the same time, if you look at I had a chance to quickly go through the 16 Finance Commission report also. There also we see very interesting proposition where they have proposed for basic performance infrastructure, urbanization linked grants to local bodies to the tune of approximately 4 lakh crore. So I think all three things are coming in sync. And this is a very, very interesting development. And here, of course, we have to see that the major problem, whether it is the level of the ministry at the central government or the local bodies, it is the lack of capacity to implement programs, to plan programs. And when the central government in our Ministry of MSME, where our budget is to the tune of approximately 24,000 crore, less than 50% is spent. And that is the state of affairs in most of the central government agencies. Maybe some part due to elections sometime. But I think this is a fact if you go at the lowest level also, urban local bodies, that they have very limited capacity for governance, for planning, for accounting. So one major point of departure that I see in the 16 Finance Commission recommendation is that the grant will be available only when they will file accounts which are audited by the chartered accountants. So audited accounts. You'd be surprised that in Meerut also we saw, and in many other cities, that for decades together, they have not audited their accounts. So auditing the accounts and putting up the governance structure would enable them to raise funds to build cities. For example, we compare Meerut to Birmingham. It is approximately the same population. As a matter of fact, Meerut is higher. Meerut is approximately 1.8. Birmingham is 1.4. But they have been able to monetize their incomes and raise funds from the market, from the bourses also, and from the multilateral agencies. And that's why they could build long-term projects like builds, roads, and infrastructure that may pay up in 10, 20, 30 years. In their current capacity, where just whatever money they are having, they are spending as can say for repairing the roads, etc. They can't think long-term and building infrastructure. I think these three things put together, what has been proposed in the economic survey, is proposed in the budget, as well as in the Finance Commission report, I see some very interesting development for MSMEs, because we see that, through the reforms in the governance structure of urban local bodies, all the economic drivers that are there at the district level, I think would be unleashed. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's go to the audience now. Please feel free to raise your hand and ask a question from any of our panelists. Yogesh?
I apologize beforehand if I ask a very simple question, but I'm coming back to India after a while. Now I'm looking at your interest expenditure, and maybe this is for Kavita, the interest expenditure to GDP or to total expenditure maybe is what, 25%? That's a very high ratio by kind of any major economy, by any emerging market as far as I can tell. So why isn't there a greater imperative for fiscal consolidation? If a quarter of expenditure is going, that's more than any other line item, I'd guess. And interest rates at the long end are going up, right? Japan went from 0 to 2, the US is heading up at the long end, so we're going to be dragged up with that. So that headwind's going to get worse. So that's my question.
Or how would you like to take?
Janak? Let's take a few.
Kavita, you mentioned that there may not be need for fiscal consolidation if the GDP numbers are, but leave it that aside. Even if there's no change, as you were saying, GDP number was revised downwards last time. But my worry is that even if we continue to do continue to keep the target of 50% plus minus 1% by 2031. Actually, if you see the fiscal policy statement, and one place it is mentioned 2030. So I'm not too sure whether it is 2030 or 31. But even if that we do, our mandated target is 40%. So we have been facing some crisis every 10 years. We faced crisis in 2008, then came COVID 2020, 21, and then by the time 31 comes, there will be another 10 years. So my worry is, if we face any other exogenous shock, where we have the fiscal room to maneuver, and the suggestion which I have, that government needs to continue fiscal consolidation, and even not only up to 30, but even beyond that also. And we should be trying to bring down the debt to GDP ratio to 40%, so that tomorrow you face any other crisis, at least you can then raise it up. Yeah.
Interesting question that I will try to answer, but okay. So the process of budgeting, as I understand, is to find is working at the increment at 1 year at a time. We're not talking about planning horizons. We are talking about a year at a time. The inflation targeting mechanism was supposed to bring down interest rates in the country, which it did, which effectively it works like a double-edged sword for the government, because it does bring interest rates down, but it brings down growth rates, nominal growth rate, and revenue generation down as well. So that is the double-edged sword for the government. So the conceptual idea of wanting to do consolidation is accepted historically. All finance commissions have talked about it. All plan documents would talk about it. So it is not, the idea is not rejected. The implementation is what we are talking about. To give credit to the present dispensation, we have had about 10 years of trying to be very prudent. So there has been a chiseling away at the debt. The challenge for the government has been that first was COVID, so it sort of rocked the boat. But apart from that is the idea that, put it badly, a 14% nominal growth in GDP is a very easy tool to work with to get your debt to GDP ratios down. It goes down very fast. If you're looking at nominal GDP growth of 8%, like we saw last year, then you have to struggle to get your debt to GDP growth down while finding space to do everything else that you want to do. So this is our trade-off. While I guess everybody agrees that you would want to see a lower debt to GDP ratio, push comes to shove, we've actually been able to find the space to do whatever we wanted to do. So bad times, we have done higher debts and higher deficits. The question is, how fast do we return to a normal from that high? While we wanted a 40%, we were never at 40% in the last 20 years, 30 years. We have never hit 40. So aspirationally, 40 sounds good, but the government again chose to do a debt to GDP anchor as against a deficit to GDP anchor, which allowed for lower reductions. It gave the government more flexibility as it was presented. So so I think the concern is that interest grabs too much space, and therefore we have to be able to bring that component down, which is the elephant in the room. But there is no dramatic way to do it. And there is no way a government in a developing country is going to accept significantly, it's going to accept revenue surplus. So we will not be able to come to a space where we say we don't have fiscal deficit, we have fiscal surplus. That's a long distance from where we are today. So we can only chip away at it a little at a time. And since we are looking at incremental, we look at it as progress.
No, I don't disagree with what you're saying. Is it making any difference, is it? Okay. See, I just want to ask, is it what you're saying the following? That if you can't afford an inflation tax, you got to raise some real taxes. Because all this it's all very easy if the nominal GDP grows at 11. It really means let's have an inflation tax. So really you have to judge what is our capacity. I think right now our capacity to accept an inflation tax may be much higher than our capacity to tax anything. So, we're getting all this holier than thou. We must have inflation targeting. Actually, Rakesh Mohan has escaped. He should have been making these points. But isn't that the bottom line? That's one point. Second point, as far as states discipline, I'm not at all a believer that, an incentive will make the states raise more taxes. Because raising taxes is a reward in itself. Isn't the best thing to do is to have the kind of monetary banking sector reform that state interest rates reflect their credibility. At the moment, states with vastly different credibility are getting borrowing at 10 basis points more. That's all. I mean, that's ridiculous. And this goes down to the other thing. If you want the system to work, you have to separate out the good performers from the bad performers. And that means allowing the good performers more room, and they'll actually crowd out the bad performers. And somebody will then the politics will have to then focus on why are you a bad performer. Now, if you're not going to do that, we're not going to get good results. Is this fair?
The first point is fair. I do believe inflation tax is the easiest one to do, and we don't have the capacity to raise taxes any other way. Every time our tax to GDP ratio reaches 12, I think we become uncomfortable. So our income tax, the raising of exemptions under personal income tax, which we did last year, in my view, is a terrible idea. It makes absolutely no sense to say that now people need to have 12 lakh rupees of income before they are subject to tax, because you will then still have a 1.5 crore people paying taxes in the country, and then we'll complain about 1.5 crores paying tax, and the 1.5 crores feel aggrieved, so we need to give an incentive again another few years down the line. So we are in this strange vicious cycle so far as taxes are concerned. So that's the problem. So yes, for me, inflation tax makes a little more sense because it addresses some of the other concerns. Then do you want to choose a number? Do you want to choose 4, 6, 8? That is up for grabs. Too high is too much, but what is too high is debatable. Turning to your second point about states, I agree states will collect all the resources that they can collect because that's the resources they get to spend. So that is incentive by itself. But unless a state in some senses is allowed to default, performance does not matter. As long as the resources you have get used to pay your liabilities, you're as good a borrowing risk as anybody else. So your performance on all other fronts doesn't really matter. If I honor my debts but don't pay my teachers, the lender doesn't care. So in that sense, I think the voter, I'm not sure the voter cares either. Yeah, because you have to get the teacher to become a larger part of the ecosystem. You need more teachers for them to be able to vote the government out of power.
They do all the elections. They're the biggest problem.
No, in the sense that in terms of the number of votes, perhaps they're not large enough. This is my difficulty, because I think we have state governments will not default on payments. So far, we haven't had state governments coming close to default. Government of India will bail out a state, presumably. That is an implicit guarantee that people perceive. So all of it put together, there is no driver. Sorry?
The cooperative federalism, that will be quite difficult because people will point to favorable treatment.
Well, people have been pointing to differential treatment, but if there is a crisis, then Government of India will perhaps bail them out. The question is whether the lender believes that you will bail them out. Whether you'll actually bail out a state doesn't matter. Whether the lenders believe, the banks believe that you will bail them out is the only thing that matters. And which is what is extending down to the municipal bonds as well. Will we allow a municipality to fail is when you will get differentiation in the rates. Otherwise, you are not going to get differentiation. So that is a challenge. I don't think every other tool in the toolbox works unless potentially a state can say, can I rewrite my debt and can I renegotiate? Even one round of renegotiation will perhaps do more than everything else put together. So that's my sense of my 2 bits on your question.
Please.
Budget discussions, I found, always look at the budget projections for the coming year, and very little attention is paid to what actually happened the previous year. The budget also contains that. And if you look at this year's budget, for instance, there are a huge number of central schemes and other things where the difference between the budget estimate of the previous year and the revised estimate is of the order of 50 or 60%. And to my mind, it points to 2 things. One is perhaps an inability to absorb. So you have the money, but you don't have the capacity to spend. That's a possible reason. The larger reason is that the tap has been turned off. Okay. Where has it been turned off is interesting. So water mission, AI mission, computerization of agriculture credit societies, R&D expenditure, education, you know, so where are the priorities? I mean, you talk about enabling the economy to compete for tomorrow, but what are your priorities reflecting on the ground? I just wanted the panel's views on that.
Anyone wants to come in on that?
Priorities are more into chip making and then creating jobs. But I felt job is one of the biggest things that they should be worried about. And our big industry is not going to create as many jobs. And small and medium enterprises already you have heard. The other big thing that has been introduced in the budget is G Ram G. Okay, so the budget for that, I don't know whether anybody has noted, is a new one, 95,692 crores. So literally 96,000 crores. And what I don't understand, they still have under Manrega 30,000 crores. So 30,000 crores plus this 96,000 crore. This is largely for the rural areas fallback arrangement. But whatever had been budgeted earlier and what is the impact of this, the assessment, whether they are creating productive jobs or not, has to be seen and question mark. I thought there was a very good program of PM Gramin Awas Yojana, because at least some assets are being created which are visible, tangible, and permanent things. But there the situation was they budgeted 54,832 crores, They spent only 32,500. So there was a major deficit in that. And now again they go back to the same which was there earlier. So job creation, what I observed with my study, from China, because we have too many people in agriculture. 45-46% of workforce is in agriculture. China was like us, but today they are at 22%. So we need to get at least 15% of the workforce in agriculture out of agriculture. And in China, where they went, was in the construction activity. 200 million people came out of agriculture to build, Beijing and Shanghai's and other infrastructure. I think we are still lagging behind much more on that. And I would put actually this entire Manrega or G into building houses for the rural areas or roads which are productive, and so that permanent assets, and they are very labor intensive jobs in the rural areas. If we don't get that right, the income of the people, it's difficult to raise, and dependence on agriculture will remain. It's a parking lot of the poor, literally. And with a holding size of 1 hectare, what can you, produce and what income levels you can have? Thank you.
Manrega and
Ji Ramji.
yes, and of course the 5 kilo free food grains.
Yes, of course.
Why spend on
Exactly. Whatever we have been saying, whatever support you want to give through direct income support. Because now you have the accounts, you have all this digital economy, at least the leakages in the system can be reduced or stopped. We had seen earlier in 22-23 data, the leakage in the public distribution system was about 22%. In 23-24 consumption data, it has come down to 11% because earlier we were giving 10 kg during this COVID thing, and that leaked away like anything. But it has come down from 2011 when the leakages were 46%. PDS, it is the biggest annual scam. Now, if you directly give to the people you want to empower, at least they have a choice that they want pulses or oil seeds or milk or egg or anything more nutritious. You are giving rice to a rice producer. What's going on in the country? So all these things, the amount of resources going in the rural areas are large, but the way they are going, fertilizer subsidy. We have been saying, give it directly to the farmer and then free up the prices of NPK. Innovation will come. 20 to 25% of the fertilizer, urea particularly, does not go to agriculture. It goes to non-agriculture uses and even to our neighboring countries. We are very generous on that. So all these things, there is only one trump card, and that is whatever out of your budget of 53.5 lakh crores you want to give it directly into their accounts and free up the system. We have done that in other cases, but government, yeah. Yeah.
Supplementary is always mischievous. I know it's all very difficult, but as a practical thing, wouldn't it be best if the fertilizer subsidy were put in the budget of the Ministry of Agriculture?
Of course.
And all the joint secretaries who deal with also shifted to agriculture, and let the agriculture minister decide.
In fact, what do I tell? I met the minister concerned. I met the minister concerned.
The minister concerned is agriculture or fertilizer?
Agriculture.
You should have met the PM.
No. That's exactly. No. The idea was, what is it that he should be asking the PM? Okay? And I said only one thing, that please get the fertilizer subsidy from the Ministry of Chemicals and Fertilizers to your thing and give it directly to the farmers, because you are facing the
No,
farmers.
he
they are
can
not-
consider, it can be
All
done
the-
in a phased manner, whatever, phase out. He doesn't have to abolish. Tell the industry to go and lobby the Ministry of Agriculture.
Yep. So
That's what
this
you have to do.
is, we are in the talks on this, but so far, I think after the farm laws debacle, the appetite for any reforms related to agri-food sector.
This is not a reform, this is just an administrative reorganization. I mean, in principle, if the farmers are upset, they can go to the Minister of Agriculture and say, no, no, give it all in fertilizer subsidy. If they're not, then it'll go the other way around.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, this is so simple, it looks. I said,
Hey,
if
you
you
need a
don't
tough
want
guy
to transfer,
there.
you merge the
Steve
two
Subramaniam
ministries.
type of person.
You merge the two ministries, you have a union minister. People did not know who is the minister for fertilizers, who is getting much more resources than Ministry of Agriculture.
Commerce Ministry, import controls, export controls,
Yeah.
Consumer Affairs Ministry on price controls, stocking controls. Yeah,
Yeah.
basically the Agriculture Ministry is irrelevant to the farmer. All the other ministries are more relevant.
Okay, we've met and exceeded the 2:30 mark, so I'd like to thank the audience, but especially our distinguished panelists. Thank you so much. I thought that was thought-provoking, thorough, and also quite entertaining. So thanks very much.
What? Okay, so thank you for asking.